Hey there, Around the Layout listeners. With advanced previews of upcoming episodes and monthly giveaways, now's the time to become an Operating Crew member. For just $3 a month, you'll get an exclusive membership sticker, your name listed on the Operating Crew roster, and automatic entry into our monthly giveaway drawings. Just as important, your financial support keeps all of our episodes from behind paywalls and free of those annoying car insurance commercials you hear on other podcasts. Joining the Operating Crew is quick and easy. Head to patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. And if you missed that, you'll find a link on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And thank you for being a listener. Enjoy the show. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. On today's episode, we have from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Paul August. Paul, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ray. How are you tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, and great to be able to hook up with you. We had the delay. We were supposed to record a few weeks ago, but a couple issues and problems here at the home front. But glad we're able to finally connect here and be able to record this show and get to learn more about your Mondovi line, which I've been watching on your YouTube channel, which has been really cool. You've been providing quite a few really good updates on that.
Thanks. I'm glad to see that you pronounced it Mondovi Line. I get a lot of people who say Mondovi.
Oh, okay. It's not often I pronounce things. I usually screw up names and get them all unpronounced, but Mondovi I was able to figure out.
Yeah.
Well, looking forward to talking more about your layout a little bit, but want to get to know you a little bit first and ask the question that seems to lead off. What got you started in the model railroad hobby?
Okay. I think the die was cast long before I was around. You mentioned I'm living in Pittsburgh. I'm not from Pittsburgh. So I'm modeling Wisconsin. Because I've just left there after 35 years in Wisconsin. Back in 1892, my great-grandfather hired on to the Chicago and Northwestern.
Okay.
And he ended up working there for 50 years.
Oh, wow.
So he retired in 1942 after 50 years. And I don't know much about his early career, where he started and what he did, but he ended up as the foreman of the wheel shop, the C10 wheel shop at the 40th Street shops in Chicago. That's the big Chicago shops that they had. So he was I never knew the man, but he was the employee. Now his son, who was my dad's uncle, he also worked for the Northwestern, and he started sometime in the 20s. And he worked his way from being a hostler at the Proviso Yards west of Chicago. And he ended up working until about 1970. And he was also the foreman of the same shop. He worked for his father and then took over the shop.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not sure how it is in other places, but at this time in Chicago, a lot of families lived on the same block in the same house. Mm-hmm. So we had a duplex where my great uncle lived on one floor and he worked for the railroad, and we lived on the other floor. So when I was born, which is like 1961, there was already a model railroad in the basement.
Oh, wow.
My great uncle and my father built a fairly large railroad from what I remember, and it could be a kid's memory, but it seemed to be huge.
Yeah.
And it was a U-shaped layout, but it was like an inverted dog bone. There was a loop at each end, and they took it and then folded it, so it was a U. I remember all the scenery was hard shell plaster, just painted green.
Yeah.
But they ran all exclusively brass steam.
Oh, okay.
So they bought brass steam locomotives, unpainted, and then they would custom paint them. They had their own freelance railroad, which was actually named after a railroad that used to be in the Chicago area called the C&NW, which originally was the Palatine, Lake Zurich, and Wakanda. And that railroad at Palatine, Illinois, it cut off of one of the Chicago Northwestern commuter lines. And it didn't make it through the Depression. It was out of business probably about a few years before my father was born.
Okay.
Now, my family had lived out in Wakanda, and my dad used to walk the right-of-way, which was a trail by this time.
Yep. So
it was kind of like the family railroad. Even though they didn't model that railroad, they just took the name. They neither one was really into prototyping. They liked to turn the train on and watch it run.
Sure.
So this was in the basement of the house where I lived in when I was born, and they would turn it on and just run it. And when we were little kids, we would see it.
Right.
We'd see it run. We weren't allowed to touch anything, but we got up on the chair and we're so we could see. And when we were younger, and watch it run. At some point, my family decided to move to the suburbs. And as happens when your family owns several duplexes on the street, when somebody leaves, somebody else moves in. So because of that, my grandparents moved into our old apartment. And so we were going back there all the time.
Oh, okay.
So as kids, you go back there when we're getting, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, running downstairs and playing with the train. Sure. It was always the exciting thing to do, was to come back and play with the train. The other thing was that my great uncle had a hi-fi, one of the big wooden walnut hi-fis. And invariably, every time the family was together, somebody would throw on a railroad LP, and we would lay on the floor and listen to, steam locomotives.
Okay.
And my great uncle would narrate what it was, and every time. So there's always been trains since I can remember in the family.
I was going to say some pretty colorful railroad memories as a kid. Now, you mentioned it was your great-grandfather had a 50-year career with the railroad. Did you ever get a chance? I mean, you would have been a little kid. Did you ever get a chance to meet your great-grandfather? Or
only as a baby. So
yeah, okay.
he passed away when I was about 4 years old.
Oh, okay.
So I don't have any memory of him. My great-uncle, on the other hand, who was at the Northwestern for about 40 years, I have lots of memories with him.
Sure.
So one of the things that he told my father when we moved to the suburbs was, "I'll buy out your half of the railroad."
Okay.
So, we'll figure out what we got into it, and I'll buy your half out on the condition that you take the money and build a layout in your new house.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good bargaining. Yeah.
I think so too.
Worked out really good for you, I'm sure.
Yeah. So at some point, my dad built a layout in our basement as well. Now, when we would drive back into the city to visit his uncle, who had the railroad in the basement, on the way home, every time we came home, me and my two brothers in the back seat of the car would say, "Drive along the tracks."
Yep.
Because there was two ways to get home. There was the quick way, and then there was a road that paralleled one of the commuter lines out of Chicago.
Okay.
And if I remember right, it was probably Milwaukee Road line. But, sitting in the back seat and watching, a train would come by and you'd be driving right next to it. Sometimes F units, if I can remember, but it was a lot of passenger stuff, commuter stuff. So again, another train memory is seeing the trains on the way home.
Yeah, taking the better way versus the short way.
Exactly. Mom would roll her eyes, but the boys in the back seat would win out, and we get to see a train on the way home.
That's good.
So going forward a little bit into Niles, Illinois, where we lived. Niles was one suburb northwest of Chicago, and my dad built a again, a kid's recollection of the size. Maybe it wasn't as big as I thought, but I'm thinking it was somewhere around 24 by 12.
Okay.
So something like that. And my dad over-engineered layouts. So, you had 2x4 legs, 4x4 legs. But he was, this layout, he liked to watch his trains run.
Yep.
And it was a spaghetti bowl.
Okay.
It really didn't have any scenery for a long time, but it had a lot of track. It had a big yard and it had multiple levels of track. I don't think the grade was 1%. I think in some places a little more. But, he had, if you took the big rectangle, it had 3 holes cut out that you could stand in. And he had DC blocks for each one. And looking back, I didn't know anything about this, but, my dad really knew how to do the electrical work, and he hand laid his own track and he built his own turnouts. He built his own fleet of blue box kits.
Okay.
So that got passed on. I hear a lot of your guests say, well, I got a Lionel under the tree for Christmas and that's what started it. And
yeah,
it was much more before I ever even got a train set that it was there. When we got to a point where my father thought we were old enough, we being me and my 2 brothers, one older, one younger.
Yep.
Every birthday and every Christmas, one of the gifts we'd get would be a blue box kit, maybe 2.
Yeah.
So we would, this is my dad's way of getting his fleet built. He would give them to us and we would build them.
Right.
And, they were just straight up, roundhouse and Athearn and MDC, just, your normal plastic kits.
Right.
I think when he was able to trust that we could do this, then things got a little better. When I say better, quality wise,
Sure.
Suddenly instead of a Athearn boxcar, there was a Campbell Brett's Brewery on the plate to build.
Okay.
Or a Campbell's Bridge, or the church, the Campbell's Community Church. I remember these. So we learned how to do wood craftsman kits.
Nice.
And my dad would set us up with the card table and all of the tools we needed. He had a little additional toolbox with everything you need to build, and glue, and here's the instructions. And, I'm not going to do it for you. Read them.
Yep.
So we started filling his layout with buildings.
Nice. Good way to do it. I mean, he's got a team of aspiring craftsmen, kit builders there learning how to do it.
So I remember building a Brett's Brewery, and I remember there was the Suydam, the old Suydam kits. I think that's how you pronounce it, Suydam. And we built a roundhouse, and we put in a turntable. And I remember a coal mine and all this stuff. Now, a lot of this stuff was just placed down on plywood.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that in our house was that I think Model Railroader was subscribed to from the 50s nonstop. And my dad kept every single issue.
Yeah, so you had that was kind of like your connection there. I mean, like I say to many listeners that are maybe younger, there was a time before the internet, and these were the sources. This was the information coming in. This is how you learned.
Yeah, that's all we had. We had Model Railroader, and I remember my great uncle liked Railroad Model Craftsman, so he subscribed to that.
Right.
And so whenever we were at either place, I always picked up a magazine. And that kind of gave me ideas that, there's something beyond just plywood.
Right.
And so my brothers and I tried things like ballasting.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it was in the corner of the basement, so the walls were cinder block.
Okay.
We just taped everything over and took a can of blue spray paint and sprayed the walls blue, and then took white spray paint and sprayed some clouds on it, and there we go. We got a backdrop.
How was Dad with this layout? I mean, it seems like he was allowing you guys to do some experimentation and learn on it. Was he, when you had these ideas that what you wanted to try, did you have to go to the committee kind of thing, or go to the boss, I should say, and ask him, or was he?
Yeah. There was a time where I remember my older brother. I think it was my older brother, but I'm not sure. Anyhow, we added 12 inches to the front of the layout.
Yep.
Because he had a track that was elevated about 4 inches, right at the edge of the layout. Okay. You couldn't put any scenery or do anything. It was just, it had 2x4 risers, and that was it. So we went to Dad and said, can we add a foot onto the layout and we can do some scenery? And we ended up building an old Western town with Campbell old Western kits.
Okay.
And my brother put a lake in, so we could try a little water epoxy, however he did it. There was no theme.
Mm-hmm.
There was no, it wasn't even necessarily a region or an era. It was just a railroad.
Were you still powering it with that brass steam, or by that time
only brass steam?
Wow.
He had some big, he had a couple of Great Northern big steam locomotives. He had some Pacifics. He had some switchers, 060s, 080s, some Mikados, but they were all painted black with a Tuscan red roof and C&NW on the side of the cab, and the big numbers on the tender. So, and it was all DC.
Yep.
So you're flipping switches from one block to the other.
Yeah.
And then got a little older. Yep. And the railroad was still there, but it wasn't really on the radar anymore. And as a lot of your guests say, high school comes along, there's girls. My younger brother and I got into cars. So in high school, we bought some, they weren't that old then, they're maybe a 15-year-old car.
Yep.
But we had a couple of early 60s Impalas and that we were working on in the garage, and, girls and parties, and I started playing guitar in bands and things. So the train just kind of got left there.
Yeah.
So at some point, my parents decided they were going to move from Chicago to Wisconsin.
Okay.
So the layout got cut up into pieces and carried down the street and reassembled in a neighbor's basement. And I don't know what happened to it after that, but I remember it being cut into pieces carefully.
Yep.
And being carried down the block to the neighbor's house, 4 houses down, and into his basement.
Wow.
I don't know whatever happened to it after that.
Yep.
But my parents moved to Wisconsin. They bought a resort in northern Wisconsin on a lake.
Okay. Happened
to be on the northwestern line between Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, and Spooner, Wisconsin, one part of the old Omaha main line.
And about how old were you at this point?
At this point, I was just out of high school.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was just out of high school. So this was a town called Chetek, Wisconsin, but when we lived in Chicago, Wisconsin was our vacation spot. It's where we went fishing.
Okay.
So there's, we used to fish in a place called Fountain City, Wisconsin, which is on the Mississippi River. There was a train track that went right by it, and I had to look up at the time period. It would be the 70s. It would be the Burlington Northern. Okay. Burlington Northern's the main line. Used to the old Burlington main line. Me and my brothers used to run across the field when the train came by and go stand as close as we can to the tracks as it went by to feel that power of the freight train going by.
Right.
And then we used to go to Spooner, Wisconsin, and in that area. And in Spooner, Wisconsin was the Omaha shops originally, big shops back in the day. And there's a tourist railroad there now, but we would go there and walk through the old rail yard, and there was a tavern across the street that had all memorabilia. And my great uncle, who had also moved to Wisconsin by then, he would take us to this tavern for a burger, and it was just all railroad memorabilia all over the place, the whole walls of it.
Nice.
And so my great uncle had bought a place up near Webster, Wisconsin, Siren, Wisconsin. It was in between there, but the Sioux Line ran up there. So there was a Sioux Line track through that town, and they were still running trains on it at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So we would drive up to visit a lot, and about halfway between is by Baraboo, Wisconsin, is the Mid-Continent Railway Museum, and we would go there because they had a operating Chicago Northwestern 10-wheeler steam locomotive.
Oh, awesome.
And we would go ride that. So again, even though we had gotten older, trains were still
right
everywhere.
Yeah, once you get infected, it's over. I don't think it ever exits your system. It takes a massive exorcism to get railroading out of your system once it starts.
Exactly. Now, when my parents bought this resort, they had it was a 3-bedroom house and a hotel on a lake. My dad built a new layout in the basement, and awesome. This was not as big of a layout, but still, very. And it evolved. I don't remember a lot about it, but I know it was down there. And when I would go and visit them, we'd run trains.
Right.
And as time went by, they sold the resort after so many years when they retired and bought a house across the lake, and he built another layout.
Wow. Your dad was really into it.
Yeah. Yeah. But here he didn't really want to build one at this last house. And I kind of talked to him about the shelf layout. It wasn't like a shelf layout is today. I didn't understand that was the concept I was telling him.
Yeah.
But he had a room in the lower level of their house that already had shelves around the entire room.
Okay.
And I said, well, Dad, if you took this one shelf out and used this shelf here, you could build a layout all the way around the room.
Right.
And it was probably 24 inches off the wall. And sure enough, I came back one time and there was a layout started.
Awesome.
And I used to bring some locomotives up there and run them at his, I'd bring my diesels and run them there.
Right. Did he keep the brass steam throughout the entire thing, or
the whole time? He never changed from DC, and he never changed from the brass steam.
Wow.
When his uncle, my great uncle, who had the house in Chicago, when he passed away, my dad inherited all his brass locomotives.
Okay. So
now my dad had twice as many.
Yep.
And I'd go up there and I'd be like, "Where'd that come from? Where'd that come from?" And there'd be a couple new Mikados. I'm like, "Oh, those he never ran those. They were in a box." Oh, okay.
Right.
So we're talking Pacific Fast Mail and old 50s era, 60s era, Korean made, and that stuff's all in my possession now.
Nice.
So I don't run it, but I have it all, and I used to display it when I lived in Wisconsin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome that it stayed in the family. You're able to keep it that long, that it ran that long. That's a really nice heirloom to have for the family.
And one of the things I did, my father passed away a decade or more ago now. One of the things that I did was I took specific steam locomotives, mm-hmm. and I had relatives asking. So I sent one out to all the kids in the family.
Awesome.
So they could all display one of Dad's locomotives.
Yeah. Yeah, he just, again, it fascinates me. Your dad was really in love with it. I mean, to do four layouts and, keep his stuff. And, I mean, with his grandfather, your great grandfather having such a long career, I mean, railroading in the blood.
Yeah.
And he kept that model railroad going and through multiple moves. And that's really neat. Never really gave up on it.
I once asked my dad why he didn't work for the railroad, and the only reason he didn't was because he didn't want to have to travel, because you go where they send you,
right?
And he didn't want to leave Chicago.
Yeah.
Now, by the time my parents retired up to Wisconsin, mid '80s. By this time, and so I'm about 25 at this point. I moved to Milwaukee.
Okay.
And I ended up eventually, I went to school there, got my degree, worked there for a while. Trains were always in the background, but I never did anything against, since I left my parents' house, I never built anything. There was always trains in my life, but never modeling.
Sure.
My train set that I got, and I think it was Mantua probably made it. I don't know if it was a Tyco branded set or what it was, but for some reason my father thought I would like a, Civil War era looking, steam locomotive. It was red plastic with the big smoke stack looking thing, and it just wasn't my style. I still have that, but it wasn't exactly my style, but I ran the heck out of that thing.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, even older. So eventually I got married, bought a house, and my first thing I said was I need to build a layout.
Right.
So I built a lot of unfinished layouts. And I know that's a pattern with some people, and
Sure.
It was definitely with me. I built a layout. It was a nice layout in concept. I didn't put a lot of thought into it. I just wanted to build a layout.
Right.
So I built a layout in the basement. It was not quite a square. It was kind of a square with an angle section because the room was in the corner of the basement. Mm-hmm. We had 2 kids in quick succession and needed more space, and time to buy a new house. Layout came apart.
All right.
And so the next house we had a bigger basement. And by this time I had joined, I had met some guys at Train Fest.
Okay.
In Milwaukee, and a half a dozen of us started a modular club.
Okay, cool.
So we started a club. We called it Milwaukee Fallen Flags.
Okay.
And we had guys that modeled the Northwestern, the Sioux Line, the Wisconsin Central, the Milwaukee Road, and we built 2-foot by 4-foot modules based on NMRA standards. We built 4 corner sections so we could put together a rectangle, and we started doing shows.
Awesome.
We kept them. Everyone kept their modules in the basement, and we built ways to carry them. We built racks for them, and the legs were removable, and we figured out easy way of connections, suitcase connectors, and we did a number of shows, and it was a lot of fun. I started learning. These guys were good. They introduced me to DCC. I'm like, oh, this is nice. I like this. This is something new. They introduced me to some scenery techniques I hadn't done before.
Nice. I want to go back a little bit. How does that conversation start at Train Fest? You said you meet a couple guys there, but how does that conversation start?
I'm trying to think if I met one of the guys in a hobby store first.
Okay.
I actually don't remember exactly. But I remember the phone call going out saying, "Hey, we're going to meet at the Atlas booth
Okay.
at 11 o'clock on Saturday.
Yeah.
Let's all meet and just hang out."
Okay.
And so I think there was 5 or 6 of us that we got together and met, and somebody brought up the idea of starting a club, and we started out. I think we started out doing round robins at everyone's house because everybody had a home layout, or
Okay.
at least the start of a home layout. And I know that because of this house that I had just bought, I had a lot of space, so I had a layout started in one corner of the basement, but I built it in such a way that I could store all our modules along 2 adjoining walls, and attach it to my layout.
Oh, okay. That works.
So now my layout, which was probably around about 8 by 10, now had an extra 60 feet of 40 or 60 feet of modules.
Yeah. Modules on loan and in storage, but being put to good use.
Put to good use. And some of them were fully scenic, so they looked better than my layout.
Nice.
So I had that layout, and I kind of did I painted the ceiling black, and I painted all the bench work black, and hung a black curtain in front of it, and tried to go for that museum thing where you're looking at it. But it was a duck under circle, and I just didn't think through what I wanted. There wasn't a theme. I'm running all Chicago Northwestern, and by this time I was writing for the Chicago Northwestern Historical Society magazine, Northwestern Lines magazine. I was writing captions for a photo section.
How does that come about? How do you get involved with the Chicago Northwestern Historical Society?
I ran into a guy who was my neighbor, and he was part of the Historical Society, and invited me to join him.
Nice.
I know that I used to work the table at Train Fest with these guys, and I also I went to the convention in Mason City, Iowa, and in Minneapolis, and one in Green Bay over a few year time, and wrote because I had gone to school and had a degree in writing.
Okay, that definitely helps. They got somebody with some training. Yeah. Yep.
So they asked me if I would want to volunteer, and I wrote captions for the photo section in the magazine for several years.
Awesome. Great way. I mean, you know a little bit of their history. I mean, you got some connections in it. So
exactly.
It definitely helps. Yeah, great resource to them, and your obviously your talent and whatnot as well. That was really neat to hook up with them.
So life happens, things happen. The house got sold, the layout got taken apart, the modular club went its own way.
Okay.
Some people took their modules, some people didn't want them anymore, some people sold them, and there was a few years where I took all my railroad stuff apart and boxed it and put it in bins, and it was in storage. Okay. Saved all the lumber and everything.
Yep.
And it took about 5 years till I ended up with another house.
Okay.
So I thought, how about another layout?
Of course.
Yeah. So this time I had several of these modules, and I almost got to the idea of a shelf layout on my own, but not quite. Okay. For some reason, I still thought I wanted to watch the trains run around continuous running.
Right. So
instead of the 3 walls that I was going to use, I ended up putting a 4th one out with a duck under so I could run a big, oval.
Right.
And that was okay. It was fun. but it didn't get very far. By this time, my kids were high school, and I was spending more time driving to this sport activity or this school activity, and didn't quite get the layout where I wanted it. But I had a lot of ideas
Sure.
that I wanted to come to fruition, and so again, I ended up selling this house to move to Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And that story is I wanted to move to Pittsburgh. I came here to remarry.
Okay.
So Chicago to Milwaukee to Pittsburgh.
Yep.
And there are a lot of similarities in those cities.
Yeah.
And
blue collar cities for sure. Yeah.
Pittsburgh has a little railroad history here.
Yeah, there's a little bit. Yeah.
And Pennsylvania is amazing. More railroad museums and tourist places than anywhere I've ever been.
Sure.
So I moved here just a few years ago, and we've been in this house here just a year and a half.
Okay.
So I knew I wanted to lay out here. My wife was completely okay with that. One of the things we did one weekend was go ride the Maryland Scenic Railroad. Yeah. We've gone to the Washington, Pennsylvania, to the Trolley Museum. She likes trains here. She introduced me to one of the clubs that's here.
Nice.
So it wasn't a problem saying, "Hey, guess what? I'm a train nut." She knew this already.
Yeah, that's yeah. You know what you're getting into. That's a good thing.
Yeah. So this brings me to the Mondovi Line. When I was wondering what I was going to do, by this time I'm in a whole lot of Facebook groups.
Right.
I'm watching YouTube videos. So I'm watching and learning about other people's layouts. I see this thing about this shelf layout concept, which is something that I wasn't real familiar with, and switching layouts.
Right.
Now, I also had to think about reality. I'm 62 years old. This is probably going to be my last attempt at a layout.
Mm-hmm.
And what do I want from it?
Right.
So I spent a lot of time thinking about that, reading. I subscribed to Model Railroader, I subscribed to Railroad Model Craftsman. I got a whole lot of books. Now, when my father passed away, I inherited his railroad.
Okay.
My mother asked me if I would come up to northern Wisconsin and take it apart.
Right.
And I got it. I got it all, but it also included his collections of DVDs and his collection of books, etc. In his collection of books was a book by Arlen Colby about the Mondovi Line.
Okay.
Now, Arlen Colby is a man who lives in northwestern Wisconsin, and he's written 5, 6, 7 books on Chicago Northwestern branch lines, Sioux Line branch lines. So this book was in my dad's collection, and I had never really read it much.
Mm-hmm.
And it just coincided with discovering shelf layouts and the desire for a switching layout. And I looked at the prototype track plan and thought, this could work. Now, I knew that I wanted a layout room that I wanted to go down to.
Yeah.
So I'm in a 100-year-old house with a cement floor and stone walls, unfinished. And I'm like, well, no matter what I build, we're going to seal this room, finish this basement, put in floor, put in walls. So in that preparation, I put up stud walls and drywall insulation. I had an electric company come in and rewire the whole thing, all new electrical, nice floor, outlets every 6 feet. Did it. So I had the blank slate to start with.
Right. Yeah, that's the way to do it. I did it the opposite way. I kind of thrown on a layout in an unfinished room, and now I'm like, how do I slide this layout out of the way to finish this? So yeah, you
Yeah.
definitely have done it in the right order.
So that, and again, not an original thought, but something I hadn't really considered until I watched videos and live streams and listened to podcasts and YouTube videos and reading articles in the magazines, you know, top 10 things you should do before you start your layout kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad I did that. So that's where I came to think, okay, how am I going to do this Mondovi line? And I was going to double the size of what I finished in the basement, and that's just not practical for a lot of reasons. So I'm like, can I fit this whole branch line in the room I finished?
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to, go. I got 16 feet down one wall, 10 feet along the back wall, and then another 12 feet up the opposite wall. And I was going to put two of the towns there and then wrap it around in the next room for the other two towns. Now I'm like, well, how do I get this all in one room? And that's where I capital E is what I said the shape of the layout is.
Yep.
I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce his name right. Clark Probst. Are you familiar with him?
So I don't believe so, but go ahead. Tell me about him.
Clark has a layout of a Minneapolis and St. Louis branch line in Iowa.
Okay.
And he just he had some videos out and articles in some of the magazines, and I thought that's exactly what I'm looking for.
Right.
So his idea of the how he built it and shape, and I thought, okay, that's a start. And then watching Boomer dioramas with his shelf layout, that really got me going with the shelf layout and his discussion of the postage stamp scene, finishing 1 square foot at a time.
Right.
So that's how I started. So my layout was 2 feet by 16 feet, and I had 14 feet of that finished and operating before I moved on.
Right. And I would imagine that kind of helps to keep you going when you're able to finish one section and you're able to operate, switch on it, do, that whole thing kind of motivates you to keep going. You're not just, trying to go and do the entire thing all at once and not get that gratification of being able to run your trains.
Yeah. So that's where I had this 16 feet, and I was able to operate on it, and then I was able to scenic it and wire it up and do everything right. Photo backdrops.
Mm-hmm.
And I just operated that for quite a while before I started expanding.
You mentioned Boomer dioramas. That's a great person to have inspiring you and his ability to create scenery. What were some of your other inspirations as you were starting to put this? You mentioned a lot of YouTube videos and shelf layouts and stuff. Who else was kind of, inspiring you along the way?
There was an O-scale layout called the Fairmont subdivision that was 2-rail O-scale that just blew me away with what you could do with that. But besides Boomer, there's Paul.
You talking about Paul Cassar? Was an inspiration to you?
Yeah. Because I got into the HO Facebook group.
Yeah.
And followed the Riverbelt line. And there's Tim, who has the Seaboard Central.
Right.
And there's a gentleman who has, and I think it's an ON3. His name's Joseph. I can't remember the name of his railroad. The Mosquito something. It's a swamp logging railroad, but it's a shelf layout.
Yeah.
So, but I have to say, as I was building mine, I spent a lot of time. I think I watched every single video on Jason Jensen's page before I started building and scratch building buildings for Mondovi, pro scale models. I started watching live streams like Heath has one, Split Rock. Love his layout.
Yeah, Tom Geisher. You mentioned Heath Hurwitz, and
yeah,
I'm sure you've been watching the Second Section podcast when Boomer's on there.
Of course. So, there was a time where I went back and I bought a couple years worth of back issues of Railroad Model Craftsman, and started saying, "Hey, I know that guy. Hey, I know that guy's layout. I've seen this before."
Right.
Oh, Illinois Terminal. Yeah, I know him.
Right. Yeah, it's great. The information that we have now. I mean, compare it to when you mentioned that your parents, your dad was subscribed to Model Railroader and RMC, and you're getting that now. It's just information right at our fingertips. Leads me to say once again, I think we're living really in the golden era of model railroading.
I definitely
what's
agree.
available to us, and not only product, but the information is so huge. You can find out pretty much anything in no time flat.
Yeah. I don't understand when I hear people saying the hobby's dying. I'm like, what are you looking at? What hobby are you looking at? Because it's not the one I'm in.
Yeah, I mean, for those that when they say dying, they should be saying evolving. Now, they may not like the way it's evolving, but ultimately, I think it's evolving in a great place. I mean, we talked about some of the stuff, the technology that's available to us, the information that's available to us, the product line. There are so many manufacturers and cottage industry right now that's just booming, and that's all great for this hobby for sure.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, you were lucky when I was younger to get detailed parts that were quality made, and now I want something that's just, well, let's go to Mini Prints and just see what Bernard has.
That's right. Yeah.
And and I have his stuff all over my layout.
Yeah, I saw your last update. You had some figures, and you did a really nice job painting those figures, by the way. I was very impressed by that. Tell us a little bit more about, so you've got this Mondovi line, and what are some of the things that as you were, you talked about the bench work and what kind of real estate you're going to need to put this in. But as you're planning this in your head and you're learning about the Mondovi line, what were some of the things you knew you had to have for industries and operations on this?
So I've never been to Mondovi, but Mondovi is like it's a perfect stand-in for almost every small town in Wisconsin that was railroad served. So I knew, got to have a grain elevator, and Mondovi had several.
Okay.
At its high point, it had a creamery, Land O'Lakes Creamery.
Okay.
It had a cannery.
Okay.
A depot, even though the depot was barely used anymore by my era. I scratch built the depot.
And what is your era?
1959.
Okay. Why'd you pick 1959?
A couple of reasons. One, I wanted an era before I was born.
Okay.
No particular reason why, but I hear a lot of your guests talk about the prototypes they saw growing up.
Yeah.
I either saw commuter trains in Chicago, which I wasn't going to model,
right,
or small town in Wisconsin while I was vacationing.
Okay.
So a lot of the stories that I heard in the family were before my time. So that really appeals to me. And it's not even nostalgia, because it's not something that I experienced, but that late 50s to mid 60s time period, there was so much change going on. The other thing is, my first vehicle was a 1960 Ford pickup truck.
Okay.
So I wanted to have the era where I don't want to go any later than that.
Right.
I want to be able to, the classic model Metalworks makes a 1960 Ford pickup.
Perfect.
It's on my layout.
Nice. Yeah. So that kind of ties though. I mean, like you said, it's not what your great grandfather was doing. It wasn't exactly what your great uncle was doing, but there's a connection there with the Chicago Northwestern, and kind of pulls all of that together, plus all that history. And the fact that book was in your dad's collection is kind of cool too. You've got a lot of neat things tied back to your past.
Yeah, and to expand on that, I have a Brett's Brewery on my layout that if you pick it up and turn it over, it's signed by my younger brother with the date he built it, 1970 something.
Awesome. And so you're able to still keep those buildings.
I have a church scene that I put in a church scene just on the outskirts of Mondovi,
mm-hmm.
for no other reason than I had the Campbell's church that my older brother built.
Oh, nice.
So I put that on the layout. And I also have several buildings that my father built from his layout that I was able to convert and kit bash some stuff and use parts from things he had built. So his stuff is there also.
Awesome. Nice tie into all of this model railroading history in your life, all onto your layout now.
Yeah. And I took the best of the Athearn Blue Box rolling stock from his collection that were era appropriate and that would run in the Midwest.
Nice.
And I used those as well. Awesome.
So you're building away. You've got a section started. And when do you start to you've been inspired by a lot of people in Facebook groups, and then you mentioned YouTube videos, and you've watched all them. When do you decide to become a creator yourself?
I consider myself lo-fi as far as creating, but I had people saying, do you have any videos? Do you have any videos of your layout? And I'm in Pittsburgh. My family's still in the Midwest. So they want to see my layout. They want me to send them videos or send them pictures.
Right.
So I decided to start a YouTube page and try it. And it's really just me holding my iPhone and taking pictures or taking video. And I figured out that I have an app on my iPhone that you can combine videos. So I started taking short video clips and combining them into 15, 20-minute videos. And other people are doing layout updates. I'll do a layout update too.
Sure.
So it was kind of, that really was it.
Have you moving to Pittsburgh? You said you've been there a couple of years now. Do I have that correct? Have you been able to meet anybody in that Pittsburgh area in the model railroading thing, or have you kind of kept to your own layout?
I've kept to my own. I've gone to a few shows. Is it Greenberg? Greenberg has a show here.
Yep, sounds familiar.
That's out in Monroeville. I couldn't tell you where that is. I can get there.
Okay.
If you ever driven in Pittsburgh, you'd understand.
Yeah. I haven't, but yeah.
Yeah. But I've met people. I talked to the people at the NMRA table, and they had a big convention here recently that was fairly close to where I live, but I didn't have a chance to get to it. So I'm kind of a lone wolf. Okay.
But this YouTube kind of gets you out there, though. I mean, you've connected with them, and then and active in these groups. It's a modern way of connecting with modelers.
Definitely. I have a lot of people that I chat with now, back and forth, and messaging about trains, and get inordinately excited at times when I see somebody release a new video.
Yeah, for sure. And then I would be remiss not to re-mention Paul Cassar and all the hard work he's done to put the HO Scale Shelf Modelers group together along with his other administrators. Yeah, Paul does a great job. I don't tell him that, because he's going to be looking for a pay raise from me, and he keeps kind of hitting on that as my executive producer. So we might edit this part out where I say Paul does a great job in both being the executive producer of this show and also his work on that Facebook group. Amazing. I've lost count. He's somewhere at 14,000, 15,000, something like that. Some crazy
something
number
like
in that
that.
group.
Yeah,
It's
I think it's up to 16,000 now.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
It's a great.
Yeah, it's run so well.
Yes,
it's one of the Facebook groups that I love so much because there's no strife.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's constructive criticism. It's not, nobody. Listen, if you're going to put your stuff out there and you're looking for opinions, if you're looking just for the pat on the back, you're probably putting up the wrong thing. But you also don't need to bash somebody. It's nice to have somebody say, "Hey, what have you thought about X?" And then that group's got a lot of that. It's got a lot of great positivity, constructive criticism done the right way, and the moderators make sure that it's done the right way. So, kudos to those guys for really doing a nice job with it.
Yeah, and I think the group, I think it's been obvious to me that the group is open to every level of modeling, and anybody can have fun in that group.
Yeah,
and learn something. If you don't want to, be a rivet counter, no one's going to shame you for that. Yeah,
that's certainly a good thing. And as far as scale, shelf models go, as you were mentioning, I mean, in a sense, what you're doing as a shelf model, you mentioned your father doing shelf, and that's really I think kind of the next revolution of model railroading is that getting off of big bench work or thinking you have to have big bench work or even big spaces to build model railroads.
Yes. And I think when that concept, a light bulb went off for me,
mm-hmm.
And a lot of that had to do with watching Boomer's original layout,
right?
That he did, Glover Road, and understanding that, my gosh, this is just a small shelf on the wall, and look what he's doing. I was just blown away, and a light bulb went off, and I said, "Hey, I can do this too. Maybe not, obviously not to that level, but I can aspire to that."
Right.
And I'm surprised at times when I look at my layout and I say, I did that.
Yeah, it's certainly cool. And unfortunately, I'm getting to a point where I do stuff and I go out and look at it and I go, how did I do that? Like I've done something and I don't even remember how the heck I did it. But yeah, it's definitely cool when you can learn from others like that and, and be inspired by people from all over the world, including guys that are halfway around the globe. Like you mentioned with Paul, with his Riverbelt line is certainly one of them that it's a very inspiring layout to look at. So we're going to wrap it up here on Around the Layout. But before we go, I wanted to ask you, what's next for the Mondovi line?
Well, what's next right now? I'm working on Osseo, which is the first town coming into the branch. The branch dead ended at Mondovi, was 36 miles long, and that was the end of the line.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm building the first town that I want to get to right now. So I'm working on Osseo. I'm currently track is in, and I'm operating it to see if it's where I want it. And I'm building structures and getting that to want it. And it really it gave me an idea that I forgot all about something very important: staging.
Yep.
So if if the town starts the layout, I'm like, well, how does the train get to the first town?
Right.
I don't have any staging.
Right.
So now I'm expanding.
Nice.
So the next step is to keep working on this town and build probably a 8-foot long staging yard in the next room.
Nice. Working one section at a time is inspired by Boomer, getting it done one step at a time.
One step at a time.
Awesome. Paul, I'm so glad we connected and we're able to talk tonight. I've learned a lot about your family's history and what a cool story you've shared with us here with you kind of pulling that family legacy and whatnot onto your current layout. Very, very cool. And glad you were able to share that with us.
It was my pleasure to be here and my honor. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at patreon.com/Around the Layout podcast. Past episodes and more can be found on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.